Welcome to the All Things Real Estate podcast, where we talk about what really matters when buying, selling, or investing in real estate. I'm your host, Chris McAllister with Roost Real Estate Company, and today's episode is called What to Expect from Your Listing Agent, even if that listing agent happens to be you. So whether you're hiring an agent or thinking about managing your own sale, today's conversation will give you a clearer picture of what a professional listing agent really does and why it matters. And I'm joined today, as always, by my partner in crime, Laci LeBlanc. Good morning, Laci.
Good morning, Chris.
How are you today?
I'm great. I'm really excited about this. I think we kind of take for granted that we know what real estate agents do, just because they've kind of always been around, but I think it's shifted a lot, especially lately. So I'm excited to get into the listing agent side of it and what actually kind of step by step they can do for you.
All right. Well, we're trying something a little bit new today. You're going to interview me, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So we talk about this a lot on our end, right? Because this is the business that we're in. This is what we do. But I'm going to ask you to explain some things that we kind of take for granted. We're going to start with thinking like a CEO instead of a homeowner when you go through the sales process. So you a lot of times will tell sellers they need to think like a CEO and not a homeowner. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, it means that if you're going to sell your house, and this is hard to do, for a lot of us, but it means stepping back from the emotions that are associated with my home, right? My house, my whole life, really, and trying to put yourself in the mindset that you want to treat this sale like a business and make business decisions. It's almost like you're running a small temporary company, and that little company that you're running for the next few weeks, hopefully no more than that, has one goal, right? And that's to sell your home, which is normally, for most of us, our biggest asset, for the best possible return that you can get. And when you think like a CEO instead of a typical homeowner, you start to make choices based on data and opportunity, not just nostalgia or emotion.
Yeah, I talk all the time about how I can never move because I'm so attached to not only like my house, but all the things in it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I start to think about if I were going to sell my home, the first thing I would have to do is take all the things out because that would help me detach a little bit. I expect that changing your mindset to where you're looking at it from a business perspective as opposed to, your home, that kind of changes the way a seller makes decisions. Would you say that's the case?
I think if you can make that distinction in your mind between, running this as a temporary business and being a homeowner, you get some clarity. You start to think like instead of asking, what do I want? You start asking, what does the market want? What does my next buyer want? What does that market reward? So that shift, right, which isn't easy. I'm not trying to say I don't want to be glib about this, but that single shift will help you price, it helps you prepare, and it'll help you negotiate like a listing professional who does it every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of what a real estate agent does is help sellers work through the emotional part of this, right? So if a seller tell or if my real estate agent tells me as a seller, you gotta declutter, you gotta remove all this stuff, then that helps me make that emotional transition. So if a seller is trying to do it by themselves, how can they walk themselves through it? How can they stay objective?
Well, we tend to overvalue our memories. And I don't mean that our memories aren't invaluable, but we tend to overvalue our memories in that we think that other somebody else and another buyer who's interested in the house is going to feel the same way that you do, about your home. So that's what we mean when we say that people tend to overvalue memories. We're not saying that, memories are worthless or anything like that. It's a different mindset. It's really thinking about, all the birthdays, all the events, all the things that happened while, you lived in and owned that house. Those are yours and those are yours forever. But quite frankly, nobody else cares, right? So, I try to remind sellers that buyers are comparing features, right? They're comparing one house to the other, and they're comparing the price. What they're not comparing is how many birthdays we had, how many holidays we had, how many first days of school. A buyer is going to be able to attach emotionally, and they're going to be able to do that very easy, right? Because they're a buyer. It's a little bit harder for most sellers to detach emotionally, but it's a critical shift in mindset that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I feel like as a buyer, you're trying to picture the property without all of that, even what is left after you declutter, after you take away all the they used to tell you to take away all your photos, family photos, and that kind of thing. So I guess it's, looking at it really objectively is the goal.
It is. And when sellers get too emotionally attached to their home, they start to make some mistakes, right? So typically, when their emotions take over, they tend to overprice their property. They tend to underprepare for showings. And this is the toughest thing and the hardest thing is they tend to take feedback personally. And anytime you overprice, anytime that you're not prepared to put your best foot forward when it comes to a showing, or you start taking feedback personally, I can tell you right now, the market is going to punish that combination of behaviors every single time. You're not going to get the price for your house that you want and deserve.
Yeah, so if you don't have a real estate agent and you're selling your house yourself, how can you, and you can't rely on a real estate agent to kind of walk you through this, how can you stay objective?
But you got to try to treat yourself like your own client, right? You've got to once you get the home on the market, right? And you can do it yourself these days. Even Zillow will allow you to market your own home on their site. But whatever the beauty of that is you get a lot of data when you're marketing a property these days, whether it's your agent doing it via the MLS or you're doing it alone through Zillow or whatever platform you choose, there's going to be data. And even if that data doesn't include actual showings for whatever reason, you're going to get data on how many views the house gets, how many click throughs the house got. Did they watch the video? Did they go through the 3D self walkthrough? You're going to get data on how long people are actually viewing your home online, right? So you've got data from the moment you put your house on the market, there's data, and you've got to review that data weekly, if not on a daily basis. So you got to get focused on what is the market telling you, and sometimes you get that through the internet, of course, via Zillow or what have you. But it's about the data. It's not about your feelings, right? It may be the question for people to ask themselves is, if this were a listing that I was managing for somebody else, what would I recommend I do?
Yeah, well, you know how much I love data. As a marketer, I don't think there's anything more important than data. If you can't back it up with data, then there's no reason to do it. Or
Right.
you can certainly try it, but if you can't, you have to be able to measure it. So that's a perfect segue into kind of, I wanted to talk about marketing and how you market a home in a way that kind of moves the needle in your favor. And a lot of people, I feel like, think selling a house just means putting up a sign in the yard and waiting for people to call you or text you or scan a QR code and go to Zillow. But like, what does that really look like now with all of the technology we have? Like, what has changed? What hasn't changed? How do you really market a home to sell?
Well, sadly, I think a lot of realtors put a sign in the yard and sit back and wait. So it's not just for sale by owner folks. In fact, I would say that for sale by owner folks might make that mistake less often, but I digress. What you want to have is a true marketing plan. And the objective of that marketing plan is to tell your home story across every single channel buyers use, right? So every single website, the sign in the yard, postcards to the neighborhood, whatever it is, you want to be telling your home story. And the key to that is professional photos, detailed MLS or Zillow listings, you know, digital ads on social media. If you're going to have an open house, there's a lot of strategies that you can research to make sure that your message that you are attempting to convey through an open house matches up with what you have online, even the sign in the yard and so forth. You've got to have a marketing plan that's coordinated 360, right? All the way around. It's not a random thing, and it's certainly not just about getting a sign in the yard and sitting back and waiting for the phone to ring.
I think there's one area there that people are really going to push back on, and I think honestly it's the professional photos. that you mentioned. I've got an iPhone. I went and saw some blue-footed boobies. Those are birds, for those of you who don't know. Got some amazing pictures, even though I have zero experience. And so I feel like I got great pictures of my kids if I put it in portrait mode. I feel like there are people who are going to say, "Oh, no, my iPhone will take good photos. I can take the photos." So convince me about these images, Chris.
Well, I've never seen a professional photographer who specializes in photographing homes. I've never seen anybody just personally who doesn't do that for a living come close to the quality of the pictures that a real professional takes. Now, having said that, every house is different, every situation is different, and I have to say, if you do, make sure that the home is staged appropriately, you've gotten rid of all the stuff, all the clutter, it's clean, fresh paint, whatever it is you needed to do to prep the house. I'm not saying that you can't get, some solid pictures with your iPhone. I'm just saying if your goal is to get the best price possible and to leave nothing to chance, spring for the 200 or 300 bucks that it might cost to get professional pictures. Great images, they don't just show a home, right? They don't just show a room. They don't just show the size of a closet. They sell a lifestyle. And done right by a professional who specializes in marketing homes for sale, I mean, I'm telling you, it can add thousands of dollars, if not to the appraised value of the house, the perceived value of the house in the mind of the buyer. And that's really your goal. You want that buyer to make the best possible offer that they can afford. So I guess my question is, why take any chances on
Oh, I mean, obviously, I agree. I was just baiting you for that one.
that?
So no, imagery, I mean, is huge. It always has been from the time that we were starting to post images online, on Facebook when we first had our Facebook accounts using our AOL dial-up, and we had these grainy little photos. I try to show my kids these things, and they're honestly not even interested because the photos aren't good. They're just not the
Exactly.
quality they expect. And I think that's how people feel when they go and they look at a home online. And because here's the thing, other people are always going to take that extra step. They're always going to hire somebody to do these professional photos. And you can't just compare your home to how it is in real life. You have to compare it to all the homes out there on the market. And as long as other people are doing it, then that's another kind of level of competition that you have. So
That's absolutely right. Chances are there's more than one home in your neighborhood for sale, and if you're the only one that has iPhone photos in your marketing and everybody else has got professional photos, I can tell you, you're going to be at a disadvantage to the neighbors.
yeah, I mean, when as you were saying that, I was like, if I saw one of those, I would think, oh, those people aren't putting the same amount of work in as the other people. I like maybe I can undercut them on their listing price is
Or worse
literally the
yet,
thought that went to my
what are
head.
they hiding, right? Or you know, I mean, think about it.
Yep.
Everybody watches TV now on 4K TVs. Yes, you can get high resolution photos on your phone, but anyway, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but professional quality photos by somebody that specializes in taking pictures of homes matter. I tell you what we love to do is we've got a couple of vendors we use, and the brand name is called Matterhorn. And these folks come in with these digital video cameras after the home is staged, and they set the camera up in the middle of each room, and the camera does a whole 360 up and down, and you get a 3D rendering of the room. And once it's done all of the rooms, it puts together a floor plan. And I don't know about you, but I don't really care to sit and watch a video walkthrough of a home, right? If I want to get to the great room or I want to get to the laundry room, I want to jump to that room. I don't want to watch, a 5 minute linear video of an agent walking through the house. That's why I love these Matterhorn videos, because you see the floor plan, and if you want to see that room, you click on that room, and then you can see, 360 degrees around. It's just such a step up, and I do think it makes a lot of difference, especially in today's market. And as homes are taking a little bit more time to sell, any edge that you can get makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I do think that the especially the floor plan that it creates really gives you the context, and that really fits kind of in the overall marketing scheme. We want the whole story. You don't just want bits and pieces, and I think that floor plan that it creates really gives you the whole context of the home, and that's where you can start saying, oh, well, this would be, my kid's room and this would be our room and, our kitchen table would fit right here. And I think that that's part of that story that we're trying to tell, even though it's not directly related. I think it does fit there, especially when you're focusing on digital marketing. Digital marketing over time, this is one of the things that has changed. There are a lot of things about real estate that maybe hasn't changed, but this is one that has. Digital marketing is huge when you're listing a home. So talk to me about, how to use digital marketing and maybe how a professional real estate agent can give you an edge there.
Well, a professional real estate agent is going to put it in the MLS, and the MLS is going to drive that information to all the major platforms on the internet, correct? But a great agent is going to go the extra step. A great agent tends to have a giant Facebook following. We've got agents with thousands of followers on their business Facebook pages. And, they when they list a house and they put it on Facebook, it's not just about, repeating that listing on Facebook. It's also about making sure that the people that they know they're friends with on Facebook who might be interested in that property are going to see it. So, there is a strategy to how you use Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok as a marketing platform that's in service to getting that home in front of a buyer that's going to be interested. So it is a little bit more involved than simply putting it up on your personal Facebook page. There's some strategy there that may not necessarily be apparent.
Yeah, as a marketer, one of my favorite saying is posting is not a strategy when it comes to marketing, and that's one of the mistakes that people commonly make. What are some of the other mistakes that you see in marketing when you're trying to list a house?
Well, definitely poor photos or missing photos, missing details, right? You're not telling the whole story, and inconsistent messaging across platforms. If your listing looks like you just tossed it together and put it online, if it looks careless online, buyers assume that your home has been cared for in the same way. Maybe not consciously, but two things are going to happen, right? If they see missing photos or poor photos, missing details, inconsistent messaging, an investor is going to definitely see that, wow, maybe that's an opportunity to make a low ball offer. Maybe that seller is as distressed as their listing looks like is distressed. So again, if your listing looks distressed or it looks like you just tossed it together, you can bank on the fact that prospective buyers are gonna see it that way, and they'll either not bother to look at it, not bother to make an offer, or worse, they'll make an offer accordingly.
Yeah, I do think that there are sellers out there who are capable and competent and could sell their home themselves. But for most people, I feel like, hiring a real estate professional to help you through this process is an investment. And what I'm hearing as you're talking is that, a few mistakes could get you thousands less. So really investing in a professional is going to get you a higher price, and you end up not really spending the money at all.
Yeah.
It kind of evens out in the end, or I mean, hopefully, and in most cases, I think gets you more for your money. So I think that's the difference between hiring a consummate real estate professional and maybe just the guy you knew from, high school or doing it
Yeah.
yourself. So and I know I mean, obviously, we spend a lot of time here talking about how best to target and market. If you had to kind of sum up how Roost addresses marketing, how we feel about it, what would you say?
I would just say that every word, every photo, every showing should reinforce one clear story, right? And that story is why this home, why it's right for you, and why right now. I think that's really the main theme of this whole discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk to somebody like Priscilla about, listing a home, that's the feeling that you get from her. She knows who this home would be right for. And it's not one single type of person, but it's either, a family with young kids or this type of person or that. And she thinks about that subconsciously because she's been doing this for so long and she's so good
Right.
at it. And so she has that story in her mind before you probably even start staging. And it's that presentation and knowing that I think helps make buyers fall in love with homes. And you always say that buyers don't buy houses, they buy how a home makes them feel. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because we opened up this podcast today by talking about how we want sellers to divorce themselves from their feelings, right? We want sellers to be incredibly analytical, incredibly objective. But as a home seller and as a professional marketer, you want to tweak every single emotion a potential buyer may have, right? You know, buyers imagining, it is emotional for buyers, right? That buyers imagine their life unfolding in a home, in the space, right? If they come in and they see a clean, bright, uncluttered home, it helps them picture themselves living there. If they, walk into a house or see a picture online and it's messy, it's cluttered, it's haphazard, if there was an emotional uh, spell, so to speak, when they walked up to the house. As soon as they walk in, you're going to break that spell. So, as a seller, I don't want you to be emotional, but I do want you to do everything you can to play on the emotions in a positive way, but to play on the emotions of the seller because it's such an exciting time for them and you want them to be excited about your house.
Yeah, when I moved into this house, it was my grandfather's house, so there wasn't that process, right? Everything was still here. It was up to
Yeah.
us to do all of the things that you need to do, and we really started getting excited. And there was obviously a myriad feelings there because it was my grandfather's home, but we really started getting excited about our future in this home after we had removed everything, after we had repainted the
Yeah.
walls white, and we just did it to have a blank slate because we didn't know because it
But
was
that's the first
impossible to
step to
see.
making it your own, right?
Yeah, it was impossible to see like what colors we wanted or what because everything from Pebble was still here and it wasn't going to function well for our family. So I feel that one kind of in my soul. But if you had to pick three things that a seller has to do, so these must do items before they list their home, what would you say those top three things are?
Well, that's easy. You got to tidy up, you got to clean up, and you got to fix up, right? So when we say tidy up, we mean declutter. I mean, we've had sellers over the years that have rented storage units, right, to get stuff out of the house, put it in a storage unit just to make more space, right? All the stuff that, you live with, you look at on bookshelves, on tabletops, closets, etc., every day, get rid of it. Your goal when we say tidy up is to declutter everything. When we talk about cleanup, spotless cells. Now, I'm not here to say anybody's living in a dirty house, but I want everybody who's going to put their home on the market, as soon as you get it decluttered, I really want you to consider bringing in a professional cleaner that's going to come in and make sure that house is absolutely spotless. And the third piece, fix up, you got to go after those small things. If the rug is ripped or the carpet is ripped, you should probably replace that carpet. If there's a nail hole, fill that, touch up the paint. If the, threshold is not quite securely attached when you come through the front, whatever it is. And again, if you're doing this yourself, right, if you're your own listing agent, sometimes it's hard to see those things. So we have a couple of tools on our website that you can download that'll help prompt you to look for certain things. But please, 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 selling your home as is overrated. You want to repair the small things that buyers will notice, but we as owners sometimes overlook.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference, right, in the final purchase price of a home, these seemingly small things.
It does. And I got to tell you, it's the difference between night and day. The term staging bothers me a little bit. I think a staged home means that it's set up for living, but it's clean, it's not cluttered, and it's not personal, right? A staged home might be a little bit more generic. So you want people to be able to look at your house and not see your life. You want people to look at a house as a clean slate, sort of like you said at your grandfather's house, so that they can start to see it the way they will fix it up, the way they will live in it. But staging doesn't have to be an elaborate process of bringing in professionals and moving out your furniture and moving temporary furniture in. But a fresh looking home that's clean, decluttered, no obvious deferred maintenance. I can tell you every single time in the 25 years I've been doing this, that home will sell faster and potentially for thousands of dollars more than it would otherwise. That kind of fix up, tidy up, clean up, it signals care, it signals confidence, and it makes people feel comfortable that this is a home they should consider to buy and live in.
So you wouldn't be happy if if a seller said, "Oh, the buyer can fix that," right?
You
That's
know,
maybe not our ideal
there
situation.
there have been markets, like during COVID, where people were just buying everything sight unseen, but that is not where we are today. If something's broken now, the buyer's going to assume that there's more hiding behind it, so fix it. That little bit of investment, it's going to pay back big time. You're going to get it back in the price you ultimately sell the house for.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever owned a home before, you know that even if everything looks perfect, there's always something that needs to be fixed. There's always something hiding, just waiting to break. So, yeah, if you can see things that are broken, I'm sure that that's a huge indicator that there's more where that came from. So we talk about kind of the model home standard for sellers at Roost. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, if you wouldn't see it in a model home, you shouldn't see it in yours. So maybe something that every home seller listening to this should think about is drive out next Sunday to the local new subdivision that's going up and take a walk through the model home. You know, you may not, that's your goal for presentation. You may not get 100% there, but it will inspire you to take a second look at how your home is going to present once you get it on the market.
So, in other words, you would just reinforce the fact that I can never move or sell this house ever,
Right.
because I'm just looking around at all my things and there's just no way. None of this would be in a model home.
I understand.
Um, all right, let's change gears just a little bit and move on to pricing. Pricing is, I think, not even arguably, but it's probably one of the toughest parts of selling your home. And I think it's really tied to that emotion that we talked about earlier. How do you price a home? How do you take that emotion out of it?
Well, you got to go back to what we talked about at the beginning. You've got to be the CEO of this home sale. You've got to run this business. And if you're going to run a business, you have to focus on evidence. You have to focus on what's real, right? Whatever you paid for the house, whatever you put into the house, whatever you did to the house, I got to tell you, it just doesn't matter, right? Only what buyers are paying right now is what matters. So, you've got to have what we call it a pinpoint price analysis. But what we do is we primarily look at recent sales in the neighborhood, right? So we go back 6 to 12 months, and I like to look at properties that have actually sold that are as similar as possible to the home we're going to list. And then we look at what's the current demand like. We look at how many other houses are currently for sale. How many days did it take to sell those houses, or how many days have, houses currently on the market, how many days of houses that are for sale right now been on the market. All of those things kind of come together in the form of what we call a pinpoint price analysis, but what your agent may call a comparative market analysis. We've also got, as realtors, most of us have a really cool tool called RPR. Now you're going to ask me what RPR stands for, but it's we can put a link in the show notes, but it's a tool realtors have that take all of that data into account, and it formats it in such a way that it's easy to understand and make sense of. And the cool thing about those is, we're talking about it in terms of what a seller needs to get a house priced correctly, but a good pinpoint price analysis is also going to be helpful to show a buyer why this house is priced the way it's priced, right? If that makes sense. So a good pinpoint price analysis works both ways because it's data driven, right? It's comps, it's trends, it's buyer activity. Um, where the whole goal is that you want that sweet spot where you're going to get the maximum you should for the house but you don't have it priced so high that people are just going to shake their heads and walk away, right? You know, you're looking for that place where you get activity, you're looking for that price where showings turn into offers. And if we do our job right, you know, as sellers, pricing that house, there's a darn good chance you're going to end up with multiple offers.
Yeah, so that's Realtor's Property Resource, right? The database
Yes,
that you're
that's what
talking
it's
about.
called.
Realtor's
Yeah.
Property Resource.
You
Yeah.
got that
I
Google
think
machine going,
I
don't you?
do. I was Googling while you were talking, so it's teamwork that makes the dream work here, Chris. No, I think what came to my mind when you were talking about what you paid or need doesn't matter, only what the buyers are paying right now. I talked to my dad yesterday. He's got a car on his, in addition to being in real estate, my family's in the used car business. He's got a car on his lot that he's had for it's, days on market are high. He bought it for this much. He priced it maybe a little high for the market, and this is rare for them, so it really frustrates them. But he
Yeah,
priced it a little hard for the market. He's had to drop it down, and he's getting to the point where he just needs to kind of get it off the lot. And so what he paid doesn't matter anymore. He has to sell it for what the market allows. And so I think that that's very similar, whether you're talking about a
absolutely.
$7,500 Honda Fit or your $750,000 house. So I think that the one of the things that I think about is when you first place it on the market, when you first list your home, those first couple of weeks are really, really critical. Can you talk to me about why that is and why we at Roost work so hard to do this kind of research on the front end so that we can get it out there at the exact right price right away versus having to kind of play with it?
What happens is when if you're working with a listing agent and they put the home in the local mobile listing service, that automatically pushes that information out to all of the listing platforms, whether it's Realtor.com, Zillow, or whatever. But let's use Zillow as an example because it's the one that people talk about the most. The Zillow uses algorithms, and I guess those algorithms are not unlike, if you're on Facebook and Facebook learns what you like to see and it gives you more of what you want to see, right? Well, the algorithms work similarly on Zillow. If you're on Zillow all the time looking for your next house, it knows what you're looking for, right? It knows your search history, whether you want them to or not. And if a house comes on the market that fits that search history, you can bet that the algorithms are going to push that house, your house, right in front of the buyer that is most likely to be interested in it. That only happens for the first couple of weeks. You only get one chance, right? So when your listing is fresh, the algorithms on all these internet sites and with AI now involved, that all works for you. But if you miss that window, by overpricing, the only place to go is down. And you start chasing the market down because at that point, if you miss it over the first 2 weeks, you're going to have to start taking price reductions. And it sounds cliche, and every realtor, has said this more than once in their career, but your best chance of getting the maximum possible value for the house is that first couple of weeks. Your first offers tend to be your very best offers. And when you start having to take price reductions, people who are serious about buying a home, they know what when price reductions are taken because they're looking at Zillow and every place else every single day. And if people start to see a downward trend, it looks like they're going to attack, right? there's just going to be a point where whatever your next price is, they're going to come in under it. So it's hard, but when you're thinking like a CEO, maybe it's not so hard. You've got to get the best price that you can possibly come up with, and and your agent or you need to go with that, market the living daylights out of it, because again, those first 2 weeks favor the bold, so to speak.
Yeah. So again, that's why we're big fans of putting the work in at the front and we're not big test the market fans. Is that fair to say?
No, I can't afford to test the market. I couldn't afford to test the market with my house, and I can't afford to test it with
It's
your house.
expensive.
Right?
Testing the market is expensive.
Testing the market can cost you thousands and thousands of dollars, right? I mean, every day your house sits unsold, your listing loses attention, and more importantly, it loses credibility.
Yeah,
So
what's wrong with that house? Why hasn't it
exactly.
sold yet?
So you got to price that thing right from day one.
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot about Zillow, and I love Zillow, don't get me wrong, but I want to ask you a very it's yes or no, so there's no in between here, but Zillow's Zestimate, is it friend or is it foe? Is it a yes from you or is it a no?
Oh, it's an absolute friend, right? I mean, I think it gives people a place to start, but let's be clear here. A Zestimate is just another data point, right? The Zestimate doesn't know the things that you've done to the home in the last 5 years or haven't done in the last 5 years, right? A Zestimate can cut both ways. A Zestimate could assume that all of the regular maintenance has been performed on the house over the past few years, that the roof has been replaced, that the furnace has been serviced, and all those things. Which means this estimate could be much higher than what reality is, right? It's just as likely that it cuts that way as it cuts the other way. So it's a data point. It's helpful for context, but it's dangerous as an absolute, and it's certainly not a strategy, right? Zillow can't see your upgrades. It can't see the condition. There's a place for algorithms. There's a place for AI, but there's also a place for local data and how your home stacks up to the other homes in the neighborhood.
You found a maybe answer in there, even though I said yes or no, but I think that that's true. I think that, it's a good starting point. Which speaking of starting points, I think it's time we could talk about negotiation, which is where, as someone who, is anxious, I'd say, to say the least, negotiating is where I really see the value of, knowing your stuff, whether you're using a listing agent or you're doing it yourself. The ability to negotiate is going to be I mean, that's where you determine what you actually get for your home, right? So you say a lot of times that the offer isn't the finish line. Like once they make an offer, it's far from over. It's just the beginning. What do you mean by that?
It is the beginning. We've talked about getting a home ready to market. We've talked about marketing, but when that first offer comes in, or better yet, let's be positive about this. When that first batch of offers come in, right? That's when details matter, right? So, of course, the top line price is a data point, but so is the type of financing the buyer is going to have, the contingencies they're asking for. When can they close, and does that closing line up with what your goals and objectives are? A professional knows how to analyze multiple offers, and more importantly, they know how to protect you through each step of the negotiation process. So this is where there's three places, right, when selling your home. You've got the pre-work, the marketing work, the behind the scenes work, you've got the launch, and then you've got, if you've done your job right, you've got offers coming in. And then you've got the negotiation phase, which is where realtors really do earn their earn their fees. And then we're going to get to this in a few minutes, but then you get to the point where, okay, we've got an offer, we've negotiated an offer. Now we got to get it to the closing table. So yes, up to now, it's been fun and games. This is where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, it's not just about price. Looking at multiple offers on a home, or even if you just have the one, you have to take into consideration so many other factors. What are those factors that you have to look at?
Well, you got to analyze the net, right? What actually goes in your pocket after everything is done, after all the costs, after paying your realtor, after conveyance fees, after tax prorations, concessions that the buyer asks for, the cost of contingencies. Let's say you're selling your house, and you haven't quite picked out a house to move in yet. So, you've got to factor all of those things in. Not that that really has the buyer doesn't care about, but they're things that are going to run through your mind as you're evaluating which offer is best, right? If you have one offer that says they don't have to move in for 30 or 45 days, and you have another offer that says I got to move in the day of closing, maybe that works for you, maybe it doesn't. But the point is, it's not just about the top line price. The other thing is, a great agent is really going to do everything they can to evaluate that buyer's motivation, and more importantly, the strength of their financing. And that's where we get into talking about the relationships that your listing agent has with other agents in the local realtor community? Do they have the wherewithal? Do they have the connections? Are they able to garner information from their fellow realtors about about the strength of your buyer? Because remember, at the end of the day, it's one thing to even to get a contract signed. It's a completely different animal to get it to closing.
Yeah, so why do so many deals fall apart after the contract is signed? I mean, would you say a lot of deals fall apart, I guess, after the contract is signed? And if so, like why what are some of the reasons that that can happen? Because as, not a real estate agent, I feel like I would be breathing my sigh of relief once the contract was signed.
There's so many things that can happen. Just because you have a pre-qualification from a lender doesn't mean that you've got a final pre-approval from a lender. There's the appraisal process, there's the inspection process. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. But having said that, you as the CEO of your home sale, you've got to take care of the things and look for the things that you can have some control over. So before you accept any offer, you want to make sure that buyer has a very strong pre-approval letter, that the terms are clean, that the deadlines are reasonable. And I think this is a small thing that people overlook, but your listing agent will tell you there are some agents that when they make an offer on a property, they've got a complete offer package that is just beautiful, right? It's well organized, it's legible, all the signatures are there, the initials, everything that's supposed to be in a contract is there. And you've got other agents where they're just a little sloppy, all right, or maybe they're less organized and so forth. And I'm here to tell you, if I had two contracts and one of them was, good pre-approval, clean, neat, and tidy, and this sounds crazy, but a good looking offer package, I got to tell you, you know, all things being equal, there's probably a higher probability that that agent who took the time to put a great offer package together is the one that's actually going to get to the closing table.
Even if it's like a lower offer.
Absolutely. There's a lot of reasons why somebody may take a lower offer. A lower cash offer with no financing risk is going to be worth way more than a shaky, high dollar offer with, FHA financing. And I don't mean to disparage FHA financing, but generally FHA financing means that the buyer is putting no more than 3 to 5% down on their house, whereas cash is cash, right? And then you get into distinctions between people who are putting little to no money down and people who are getting conventional financing with 20% down. But there is a huge difference in probability of something getting closed, when you have a cash offer versus a financed offer. Now, am I saying that you're going to take 20% off the top? Of course you're not going to. But, if it means taking an offer and getting closed 30, 60, 90 days from when, realistically, depending on the time of the year, you might get a quote, a better offer, you've got to think like a CEO and you've got to take the offer that makes the best sense for your situation. It's not about the highest number. It's about what's going to put the most money in your pocket and actually get to the closing table.
I think that speaks a lot to the relationship you have with whoever's listing your property. I think that knowing your motivation and knowing what's important to you and understanding your story is so important. So obviously, if you're listing your home yourself, you understand that. It can be difficult to detach from that, but I think that when you work with a professional, that's one of the things that they have in the back of their mind at all time is how does this impact my client's goals? Is this aligned with what we've discussed, and how they're feeling about, moving forward with their life? So I think that's one of those features of the quiet professionalism that we talk about at Roost. Can you talk to me more about kind of quiet professionalism and what it looks like, like from the contract to closing stage once you've got that signed contract? How does working with a professional look and what should it feel like?
Well, you know, you've gone through the marketing process, you've gone through the offer process, maybe only the first offer process, you've negotiated, a contract, it's in writing, right? Because that's the first thing. There's a little thing in real estate called the statute of frauds. And it says that only those agreements that are actually written down and signed by both parties are enforceable. So, you've got to get all the way through to that point. But then another clock starts ticking, and it's that period, like you said, from contract to closing. And this is where, deals can fall apart. It's when you've got the inspections happening, you've got appraisals, you've got, lenders who hit delays or run into snags with their buyers. And without proactive management, little tiny things can become crises. And the other piece is, and this is important as your own CEO or when you're working with a listing agent, a great listing agent has seen it all, right? So to speak. They've already gotten through situations where, inspections have come back less than perfect, or buyers maybe, are asking for things for the seller to fix things that maybe don't make a whole lot of sense, or they've been through appraisals that have come in short, or, lender delays. Not everything to a true professional is an absolute crisis. Whereas if you happen to be working with a realtor who's maybe a little new, or hasn't had a whole lot of experience, maybe they're doing it part-time, they may not have lived through all of these different things that seasoned professionals have already lived through, if that makes sense. And I think that to me is sort of like the best example of quiet professionalism. It's when on the surface everything looks like it's a crisis or it's potentially the end of the world, when in reality a true professional is going to navigate that process. And they're not just going to navigate their side of the transaction, they're going to do whatever they can to get that deal closed, even if it means doing things for the buyer or the buyer's agent that maybe normally they wouldn't have to do. But again, it comes down to, what do I need to do as a listing agent to get this to the closing table? Does that make sense? I feel like I'm rambling, but
No,
I,
it makes me realize how much information there is to manage, how many, lines of communication have to be open at the same time. It makes me wonder how on earth, you can stay organized with all these things on your plate.
well, I tell you, this whole thing about quiet professionalism, it's steady communication, it's solving problems before they escalate, it's keeping everybody calm. And, I always talk about real estate as being a practice, and it's a practice no different than a lawyer practices. It's no different than a doctor practices. And if you're working with a professional, the more they practice, the better they get, the more they've seen, the better experience ultimately that you're going to have. And this whole thing with quiet professionalism, it also extends to organization, right? So, a great agent is going to track every contingency, every piece of paper. They're not going to wait for the lender to report. They're going to be reaching out to the lender to find out where they are in the process. They're going to be proactively talking to the title company. They're not going to wait till the last second to have the title company come back and say, I need this, this, and this, right? You got to keep open lines of communication with everybody involved in the process, because at this stage, it's not just about the other agent, or it's not just about the buyer. It is about the lender. It's about the title company. It's kind of like air traffic control, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there are so many things that a real estate professional is doing that I think sellers don't even realize that they're doing.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, but this is where agents really earn their keep, right? This is how they make a living. They get things to the closing table. They don't just sell houses. They don't just get signed contracts. They get things to the closing table, and that involves a lot of coordination behind the scenes, right? Again, appraisals, negotiating, repairs, deadlines before they slip. Contracts are real things, right? There's dates in there, and if you miss a date, you potentially could lose the entire deal, right? This is serious business. It's not for the amateurs out there.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of times we talk about trading hours for dollars, and that's kind of how people look when they pay someone for a service is, oh, it's not going to take them that much time, or it is going to take them a lot of time. But really, I think in every situation, but especially when you're talking about real estate professionals, you're not paying them for their time, you're paying them for their experience, right? If they have decades of experience doing this, then maybe they can do it a little more quickly or a little more naturally, but you're not paying for the time they spend, you're paying for the experience that they have. and how much easier they're going to make this process for you. And I think in a lot of ways, you're paying them to be your confidant and maybe your psychiatrist through all of this too, because
There's a lot of that too.
staying calm is not my strong point. And I will say that my lender in this scenario, because that's where my anxieties really were, and my agent, thanks, Nana, were really good at helping me keep calm when I felt really tense about how things were going to work out. And I think that's one of the things that a good real estate professional does well too.
Well, a great listing agent is going to keep everybody focused on the goal, and the goal is successful closing. So, at the end of the day, I think professionalism means being the calmest person in the room, or maybe it's the agent that makes what we know is incredibly complicated look easy.
I'm just gonna, I'll keep striving for that being the calmest person in the room thing. It's good to have goals. But I think one of the things that really helps with that is clear, consistent communication. When I was going through this process, not being in limbo, not knowing what was going on was the thing that helped keep me the most calm, and helped keep me feeling really good about the process. And like you said, kept me focused on the end goal. So I am baffled when I hear somebody say, "Well, my real estate agent never communicates with me, never calls me." Why? How can that still happen with all the ways we have to communicate and stay in touch? How does that happen these days?
Well, I I think there's a couple of things there that's going on. So, a lot of agents work really, really hard, but they're focused on doing the job, and they neglect communication. And, sellers, even rational CEO type sellers, deserve updates even when there's nothing new, because at the end of the day, silence breeds anxiety. That's just how it is. Now, on the other side of that, my tip for the day is have an open discussion with your agent about how you want to be communicated with and when you want to be communicated. In this age, I don't know who uses the phone anymore, but there are some discussions that where a phone call is the only way to convey information and convey it accurately the first time. There are many conversations I see agents trying to have via text message that in no way, shape, or form should be conducted on text messages. Sometimes email can be a little bit more impersonal. So, you take those big three, right? Texting, telephone, and email, and I'm sure there's a million others in the social media age, but there's different conversations that are appropriate for different things. If the text might be, the day of closing, I'm on my way, be there in 10, that's a text, right? If you're not going to be there in 10, it's a phone call. You just got to know your audience. You got to have a conversation about what you expect, when you expect it, and how you want to be communicated with. And that is not too much to ask.
No, I agree. If silence breeds anxiety, I think that good communication breeds trust, and that's always what we're looking for. What's kind of like your minimum standard? What's your communication rhythm that you would suggest for agents or for sellers who want to make sure that they're on the same page?
What I see is, most of the great listing agents out there, they sort of carve out a day, whether it's Monday or Friday or both, that they spend time communicating and updating their sellers and buyers for that matter in the midst of a transaction. So, you need weekly updates at a minimum. The other thing that really tends to make sellers anxious is sellers want real-time updates after showings. And
Even if it's bad,
well,
even if the showing didn't go well.
they need that information even if the showing didn't go well. The problem is we as real estate professionals, the very best of us, we're lucky to get feedback from the other agent maybe 30% of the time. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't ask. But at a minimum, if we don't have any feedback, we need to communicate that to the sellers as well. A lot of the showing services these days, they will solicit the agent for feedback after the showing. If the agent follows through on that, gives good information, that information is immediately communicated with the listing agent and or the seller. So that's helpful. But I do want to tamp down the expectation that you're going to get real-time feedback after every single showing. but you're not. But that doesn't mean your agent isn't going to have contact with a lot of agents in the market, including agents that have shown your property. So weekly updates, best case, communication after every showing, and yeah, the expectation needs to be something that you're going to hear from your agent and be able to count on it.
So the feedback that you get after showing, so what do you do with that? Is there, I mean, can you adjust your strategy? Can you make changes based on that, or is that too kind of fickle to trust?
No, and absolutely you have to. It's the market that's going to tell you whether you're priced right. The market's going to tell you whether, you've got a house that's sellable for the price you want. So, as a seller, you want honest buyer reactions, good and bad. We often say that pricing is a strategy, it's not a one-time event. And, certain feedback from buyers, especially if it's more than one buyer, says that the home is a bit overpriced, then you need to go back and take that feedback seriously and sit down with your agent and figure out, okay, do we need to sharpen our pencils here? Are we a little out of line? Sometimes you get feedback on how the house shows, right? And if you get that, then you definitely want to consider making some changes when it comes to fix up, clean up, whatever, coat of paint, what have you.
So what if there's no news? I mentioned that my biggest anxiety was just kind of being in limbo and not knowing, not hearing anything. How do you handle, no news?
Well, the best of the best will just still check in. They'll say, here's what we know, here's what next, and here's what we're watching. You know, you just don't want, as a seller, you just don't want to be left hanging, right? And, I think, again, the best among us, they anticipate that kind of anxiety on the part of the seller, and they get out in front of it, even if there's nothing new to report or nothing, good to report. How's that?
Yeah, so if you're your own listing agent, right? If you're selling without an agent, how do we have this system, real estate agents who do this for a living obviously have this system in place. What does your system look like if you're selling your home and you're your own listing agent?
I think once or twice a week or after every showing, you've got to kind of review the feedback, look back, see what's happened. But I think there's three key questions that you need to ask yourself as the CEO of your own listing is what just happened? What's next? And this one I love, what could go wrong? So you can, make some contingency plans.
Oh, my brain really loves that question. That's my brain's favorite question. It's what could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Oh, let me
I
tell
like
you.
to start with what could go right just to set myself up for success, but we'll always get to what could go wrong. And then there are some tools, like technology is so prevalent now, right? There are some tools that we use to make this whole process. We talked about just the bulk of the process and how
Yeah,
overwhelming it sounds. There are some tools that can make it a little easier. Talk to me
there
about
are,
those.
but you also have to be careful. There's a lot of technology out there where it's just a technology provider that's making any money. I have a real aversion to technology for technology's sake. We at our company, we employ every piece of technology that we can find that helps us forge a deeper, long-lasting, productive relationship with our clients, if that makes sense. So having said that, there's a lot of shiny objects out there, but like we talked about 3D Matterport tools, I think that's a fantastic technology. Digital scheduling and showing services, I think that's fantastic. Even 20 years ago when I started, there was a lot of phone calls back and forth between a showing agent, buyer agent, and the listing agent and the seller, and just trying to set times up where you could actually walk through a property. And then don't even get me started on the days before we had lock boxes. But so, digital scheduling is a big deal. And dot loop, there's a lot of different, several different signing uh, contract things out there. We happen to use dot loop, but dot loop helps keep all of the paperwork straight. It makes sure that all of the signatures are in place and it keeps everything in one place. So the three big things that we absolutely employ and that I think every great listing agent needs to employ is a great way to market and photograph for digital tours, Matterport, digital scheduling like showing time, and e-signing like dot loop. Those are the things that help speed the process along and keep everybody organized.
Efficiency and trust are the things that I think come to mind when I think about those tools. If the tool helps you be more efficient, or helps you build trust with either your seller clients or people who are thinking about buying the home, I feel like they're worthwhile. I do think that there can be too much tech, like you mentioned. Um, we talked about tech for tech's sake, or the newest shiny object, but I also think there's a human element there that you have to
Yeah.
keep, right?
There was that old phrase, high tech, high touch. There's places where high tech makes sense, but you still want to, high touch still matters, right? It still comes down to the human, belly to belly, one on one. That's where deals are done. That's how closings actually happen, right? So you just tech cannot replace human judgment, right? I think tech can amplify the expertise of a great listing agent, and I think it does. Um, but it certainly can never replace it. There is no substitute for actual experience because it takes experience before you can cultivate anything close to quiet professionalism.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that if you're not professional, if you don't have the expertise and you're doing things wrong, that tech can amplify that as well.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Tech
if
can
you're
make it
wrong, then
worse.
and you use the tech to get your wrong thing out there to everyone, then it's a lot of work to pull it back and to make it right again. So I think that when you look at the cost of, you know, selling your home, and whether that's doing it yourself and investing in the tools and the photos, or investing in a professional to help you do this. Talk to me about, why we call our service or our commission, that a roost agent gets a professional service fee. Why do we refer to it as that as opposed to just a commission?
Well, as realtors, we're not just selling exposure on the internet, right? We're not just, again, we shouldn't just be putting a sign in the yard and waiting for somebody else to take the wheel from there. A great listing agent manages risk, and that professional fee covers strategy, it covers compliance, it covers negotiation, it covers, years of building quiet professionalism. And at the end of the day, that professional service fee really better be providing peace of mind because ultimately I think that's what you're paying your agent for.
Yeah, I think that if you're a good agent and you're working with a good broker, that you've also made some mistakes
Yeah.
in these areas, compliance, strategy, negotiating, communication in the past. Nobody's perfect. And I think that that's one thing that maybe agents have of value to someone who's trying to list their home, is they've made those mistakes so you don't have to. Do you agree with that?
Well, yes, there's no question about it. There's no substitute for experience, right? And learning from your mistakes. Working with a seasoned agent, it should prevent costly mistakes, and you can make mistakes in overpricing, there's mistakes with missed deadlines, legal missteps, and those things can, God, in the worst case scenario, those could wipe out your equity. So, there's just a lot of places where, again, it sounds a little self-serving, but there is no substitute for experience.
Yeah, that's why I'm the one asking the questions today, is because I don't mind self-serving. I think that the value of a real estate agent, as someone who's not one, is obvious, but I work with them day in and day out. So I can absolutely see, sellers who want to do this themselves. And it is possible, but I'm guessing that you could probably tell me at least one time, probably several, that, having experience saved a deal that felt like doomed, that hit a last minute snag, or something occurred, and experience, and having dealt with that before probably helped you save it.
Well, there's so many places like that, that there's been issues where, a lender or a buyer didn't get their financing, and at the last minute they have to go to another lender, or they have to switch the type of loan that they're getting. Depending on the market, we haven't seen this as much lately, but appraisal gaps were a big deal, especially, during COVID when you had people buying houses sight unseen and paying, thousands of dollars above the asking price. And then, lo and behold, just because you're willing to pay that amount of money or say you're willing to pay it, it still has to appraise or the lender's not going to make the loan. So, that's a little bit less of an issue right now, but it's still out there. And it doesn't mean when things like that happen that it necessarily has to kill the deal. It just comes back to that place where experience and calm and just open communication can make all the difference in the.
So what's the trade-off, would you say, if we wanted to kind of wrap this up for sellers who want to do this themselves and be their own listing agent? What responsibilities there are they assuming, and what's the trade-off for the savings that they're going to get?
Well, just bear in mind, if you're going to do it yourself, and yes, you're going to save some money, no question about it, and a lot of money, quite frankly, but you're taking on all the responsibility for marketing. You're taking on all the responsibility for legal compliance. You're taking on all the responsibility for negotiation and all the responsibility to get from where you are to the closing table. And yes, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7%, whatever it is you're paying your realtor, that's big bucks. But at the end of the day, there is real value and potentially tens of thousands of dollars in savings when you work with somebody who has been doing this, for their entire career.
Yeah, and I think that the market you're in, right? You've mentioned that several times. This is not such a big deal in this market, but it has been in the past. Or I think the market you're in should play a role in determining whether, a seller wants to do this for themselves or whether they want to partner with a professional.
Well, you know, I think that the best sellers who decide that they want to do it themselves, and this applies though to not just people who want to do it themselves as a for sale by owner, but also when they're working with a listing agent. But the best sellers lead their sale. Again, the best sellers are the CEO of their own sale. They stay calm. They stay realistic. They stay proactive, and they keep their emotions at bay, and they try to keep logic and quite frankly math front and center. But they keep that relationship and that process that they go through with their listing agent. They treat it as a partnership, and they never let it get to the panic or hysteria stage. How's that? And
Yeah,
I've
no,
seen
I,
it
I
both
totally
ways.
agree. Yeah, that's if I could do that, I would say, yeah, let's go for it. But those are not my strengths. So I think know thyself is maybe a good a good piece of advice. What's another kind of piece of advice, or what's the one behavior that you feel like every seller should adopt as they're getting ready to list their home, whether they're doing it themselves or working with an agent?
Communication is clear. Is clearly the number one thing. If you're doing it yourself, you need to have open communication with all the agents in the market because chances are they're the ones that are going to bring you a buyer. You want to be always in a mindset that you're making decisions based on facts and not fear. You're always trying to build trust with not just with your potential buyer or buyers, and the real estate community. Um, your goal is to take what could be a very confusing process with a lot of moving parts. You want to turn confusion into control, right? If that makes sense. You want to try to look ahead, you got to look around corners. You want to be proactive enough that you're not constantly reacting to the thing that just happened, and you start to sort of lead your sale. And again, I think as we wrap up here, I think that's the theme of the whole thing is you want to be the chief executive officer of your sale. You want to be running that business. Don't let that business run you.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for just life in general, right? Marriage, parenting, politics, the whole nine. Communicate openly, make your decisions based on facts, not fear. Build trust, keep communication alive. I just think that that's that's good rules to play by, no matter
Yeah.
what. But in this case, I
They're
just
rules
think
for
that
life.
yeah, we're turning this into a broader conversation. So if kind of to wrap it up, if you had one piece of advice for every homeowner who's thinking about selling their home, what might that be?
Well, I think even if you think you're going to do it yourself, you probably want to interview a couple of listing agents and just get a little bit of feedback. And who knows, maybe they'll change your mind, maybe they won't. But you've got to do your research. You've got to know what's going on. Keep an open mind. You've got a wonderful house, but it doesn't mean that every buyer is going to see it the same way that you are. So, keep your emotions in check. Try to be as objective as you possibly can. And as my eighth grade geometry teacher used to tell me, have faith and follow the rules.
I love it. I love it. I think people forget you can interview your real estate agents. You don't have to just take the one that was
Absolutely.
recommended to you by your next door neighbor or the one that's related to you or somebody that you have had a relationship with in the past. You can interview them. I think that might be the key takeaway from all of this is find the one that works well with you and
Yes.
communicates well how you communicate and understands your goals. They're out there. Um, that's all I had for you, Chris. I feel like this is a lot of information for home sellers, but I think it's all good. And I do think there are a few common threads in there that we pulled out that will help sellers really become what we call a home selling genius and really get the most out of their property, so that they can move on to their next roost.
I think so too. Thanks for being here with me today. And thanks to everybody who's listening, and tell your friends about the All Things Real Estate podcast.
See you next time.
Bye.